The 80s and 90s witnessed an explosion of the VHS or the video home system. People suddenly went from relying on their government cables and private networks for shows to being able to pick and play those of their choice. Anime had existed on the fringes of the mainstream with shows like Doraemon for kids or Gundam for older audiences, but the VHS era caused the explosion of niche anime subcultures, and VHS meant that the creators would have a lot more creative freedom than ever before. More and more people targeted a more mature audience, and with the advent of this new subculture, animated films and original video animations grew to become explicit. Some were so raunchy that they could pass for animated pornography with ease. Not to say that different categories of stories weren't explored, they obviously were, as this cyberpunk genre began to gain traction, but this period saw nudity and sex among 2D characters in extreme ways, sometimes even in problematic and criminal ways due to the depiction of minors in such situations. But now, VHS allowed every sort of content to be available to a wider audience, and it was a given that any content would sell, especially if it was controversial. Around this time, views on sexuality, at least in first world countries, had begun to shift dramatically with the sexual liberalization of society. This contributed to content depicting sex and nudity gaining more and more traction, driving more and more sales. And for Japan, the 80s marked an era of rapid economic growth which contributed to these aforementioned situations. People had the money, people had the appetite, people had the content, and most of all, people had the desire. In today's video, we'll be going over some of the most sexually explicit films and anime from the 80s and 90s, ranging from icons like Berserk to controversial entries like Kite. Before diving into the content, we'd like to make a very small request to our viewers, however. Please subscribe to our channel, like and comment on our videos, and press that bell icon to be notified whenever we upload new content. We'd be grateful to you, and we hope to bring you the best nerdy content in the future. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Midori Shojo Subaki, 1992. We start this list off with the most banned film in the world, the infamous Midori Shoujo Subaki from 1992 by Suehiro Maruo. This piece of erotic horror revolves around a prepubescent girl called Midori from the Showa period who used to sell camellia flowers, which is the English term for Subaki. Midori is a poor girl who lives with her single mother. While selling her flowers, a man, Mr. Arashi, offers to let her visit him when she needs help. With her father having abandoned the family and her mother dying soon after she gets the offer, Midori does decide to visit this man. However, before that, she does witness her mother's dead body being eaten by rats, so that should tell you at the beginning of this film that the creator's not holding back on the grotesque levels of the visuals. Anyways, Midori goes after the man and finds herself in the Red Cat Circus, which is quite an awful place. If her life wasn't already bad, it was about to get much worse. The circus freaks whose bandwagon she now has to be part of sexually abuse her, deflowering the young girl. There's a man whose body is twisted like a pretzel, a man without arms who's wrapped with bandages like a mummy, and a voluptuous and promiscuous woman who's very comfortable in the nude among others. And Mr. Arashi himself is no saint, as he has a strange fetish for licking eyeballs and leaves no stones unturned to do it. The sight of such scenes is capable of giving anyone the ick. As part of the circus, Midori is treated cruelly, not just in general, but sexually, especially if you consider the fact that she's underage. She wakes up to watching the voluptuous woman engaging in intercourse with two other circus members, while Mr. Arashi licks the eyeballs of another teenager in the group in the other room. Midori finds some solace in feeding a litter of puppies, but even that is taken away from her when another member of the circus stomps the puppies to death and feeds their meat to everyone. That night, she's assaulted by the mummy man again, and Midori's miseries seem to have no end. She finds her silver lining with the arrival of a dwarf magician named Masamitsu, who is known for his Western-style magic. The Red Cat Circus was losing money, but Masamitsu turned everything around with his acts of miracles. He grew a liking for Midori, and the two became lovers, which is once again crazy because Masamitsu is a grown man and Midori is a young teenager, but Masamitsu is also controlling, extremely controlling, and goes far enough to kill the mummified man because he doesn't like how he looks at Midori. Meanwhile, Midori is growing popular by the day and starts being offered acting gigs. She tries to take them, and Masamitsu doesn't let her do so. When she tries to go for it anyways behind his back, he traps her in a contorted position inside his bottle. At the same time, he loses control over his powers as a result of his arguments with Midori during a show and causes the bodies of the audience to become grotesquely deformed, with their eyeballs and innards coming out of their bodies mid-show. Naturally, the circus is shut down, and Arashi runs away with the remaining money. There are little to no gruesome scenes after this, but Masamitsu does get killed, and Midori finds herself on good terms with the troop members, but she does end up leaving the troop with him before these things went down, so again, Midori is all alone. What makes this film one of the craziest entries, if not the craziest entry on this list, is because of the sheer extent of the sexual scenes. You don't expect to see someone licking eyeballs on screen for something that's not hentai. To top that off, while Japanese erotic and pornographic content are generally meant to be censored when it comes to genitals, Shojo Subaki is not, and it makes sure that we get to see everything in the worst possible ways while the protagonist lives a life of absolute suffering. There are other disturbing revelations, such as the teenager that killed the puppies being intersex, and while being intersex is not the issue, it is the fact that Kanabun merrily pees on screen while showing off Kanabun Jr. to Midori, while the poor girl is left traumatized. Worst of all, most of these things aren't consensual at all. Berserk, 1997. Berserk is Kento Miura's magnum opus. It's definitely the most sophisticated entry on this list, as it has the hallmarks of a good manga, with many considering it to be the best, be it in art or storytelling. This also means that the manga to anime transition was not the best in the case of its 1997 anime adaptation. The story is a dark fantasy and explores a fantasy version of medieval Europe. In the process, the audience is exposed to a lot of gore, darkness, violence, brutality, and sex. The story is specifically infamous for one particular moment, where the protagonist, Guts, witnesses his former best friend Griffith, now known as Femto, brutally assault his lover Casca. In fact, Guts is forced to watch it and even ends up losing an arm and an eye while trying to save her. And this scene is created to be extremely grim and brutal instead of some kind of sexual fan service, as it's being done against Casca's will and to traumatize Guts indefinitely, breaking his mind and heart. But that's not all. We have incidents like the birth of Guts, where he's born from a corpse hanging from a tree. Prior to the eclipse, Griffith is implied to have assaulted Princess Charlotte as well, although whether it was assault or not is left a bit ambiguous. Then we have the obvious Casca incident, which causes the beginning of Guts' psychological descent, but right before that, Casca was also brutally assaulted by the demons, as Griffith was offering his former allies to the God Hand in order to become Femto. There are elements of tentacle porn, as a nude Casca is restrained in every way possible and violated beyond imagination, making this entire sequence one of the darkest in animanga history. These aside, Berserk has also engaged in its fair share of generic fan service, such as the presence of nude prostitutes around Guts or other mercenaries. Despite the heavy presence of NSFW elements in Berserk, it stands out from most of the entries on this list due to the nature of its story and the reason behind why such scenes exist. Because neither is it erotic literature nor hentai or anything of that sort. Such scenes exist in this story simply to show how horribly dark the world is, which is necessary for the progression of Guts' character. Urosuki Doji, Legend of the Overfiend, 1987. This 1987 edition is a Japanese manga as well as an original video animation, or an OVA. Created by Toshio Maeda, Urosuki Doji revels in its erotic elements, but unlike the prior two examples, mixes it with humor instead of taking the ultra-dark route. But that's not to say that the story doesn't have grim elements, as Maeda was renowned for his storytelling and complex plots, despite the Erocentric style, which other mangakas of his category often fail to do. The OVA, which now has a cult following, has a great deal of violence and horror. Unlike the manga, the anime also depicts sadistic scenes of sexual assault using tentacles, to the point that the creator himself called his work cruel and repugnant in one of Playboy Japan's issues. In fact, the Urosuki Doji OVA is the first media content ever to depict tentacle rape. But the director, Hideki Takayama, claimed that he wanted to tell a story about this violence due to the impact violence and sex has on pulling out a response from humans. Overall, with the global popularity of this OVA, the tentacle trope crosses the Japanese borders as well. This story is about the human world, the demon world, and the man-beast world uniting every 3,000 years with the revival of the super god or the titular overfiend. The protagonist, Amano Jiaku, is a man-beast who wants to find the real overfiend to ensure a safe future for the three worlds. He's joined by his sister Megumi, who is a nymphomaniac, laying down the foundation for the OVA's Eki elements, and the trio is completed by their friend Kuroko. Eventually, they meet the ideal Akemi Ito and the hypersexual Nagumo Tatsuo. However, encountering demons complicates things for him, as they wish to destroy the Overfiend and prevent the three worlds from joining. Due to the heavy erotic content in the series, the English releases have often been heavily censored. 4. Violence Jack, 1986. Violence Jack began getting serialized in 1973 basically 13 years prior to it being animated. It was created by Go Nagai, who's the same writer as Devilman, and it's set in an alternate timeline that follows the events of the Devilman series. In this story, the titular Violence Jack is a giant who journeys across the dystopian landscape of Kanto and clashes heads with its new ruler, the Slum King. In this presence, we see the story taking place in whatever's left of Japan following the Great Kanto earthquake. The country has been reduced to a land of bikers and samurais, while way too many people are living in wastelands. Meanwhile, the new Slum King lives in a grand fortress. Humanity is divided between the strong and the weak, and Violence Jack is requested by the people to become the protector of the weak. But among the strong, you also have people like killers and rapists who are a constant threat to society. Like Devilman, Violence Jack has a lot of sexual assault, gore, violence, and even cannibalism. However, its erotic elements are more jarring because of how brutal it is instead of sexual. In fact, we were made witness to sexualized cannibalism in the third episode, namely Evil Town, and this has gone on to become one of the anime's most controversial scenes. In this, a woman named Junko, who's from a survivor group, gets captured by the Slum King's men and is subsequently mass assaulted. Following this, her body is butchered. She's then cooked and served to prisoners, and in fact, her lover unknowingly ends up eating her. This moment would have been grotesque anyways, but it's the fact that the gang assault doesn't end at the assault itself, which alone would have been ridiculously traumatizing. Instead, it enters the cannibalistic territory, allowing the scene to explore two taboos at once. This is an extreme case of exploitation of a human, but the creator, Go Nagai, intended to experiment with such themes, specifically nihilism, in order to depict the moral corruption of society in such situations. And by society, we don't simply mean his fictional one, we're also referring to real society where people will do anything and everything if the time and place calls for it. Mesoforte, 1998. The late 90s witnessed the release of Yasuomi Umetsu's erotic action OVA known as Mesoforte. The term originally referred to a moderately loud volume within a music theory context. The story introduces protagonist Momokichi Momoi, who is the owner of a professional baseball team known as the Peach Twisters, as well as a mob boss. When players prove to be effective, Momokichi simply kills them. He also has a twisted daughter named Momomi who is much worse than Momokichi, but Momokichi dies early in the story while being chased by mercenaries from the Danger Service Agency, namely Mikura Kenichi and Tomohisa. Meanwhile, her father's absence means that the DSA is about to be Momomi's next victims. At some point, Mikura has a dream of her colleague and crush, Kenichi, where the latter confesses his feelings for her and they have explicit sex. As Kenichi ejaculates inside her, their other colleague, Tomohisa, arrives and assaults Mikura, while Kenichi watches the scene for his pleasure. But this scene isn't just your standard R-rated movie sex scene, and instead enters complete hentai territory with its depiction of penetration and a whole lot of moaning. In the real world, a manhunt begins, ordered by Momomi to kill the DSA. The only way out, as per the client who had hired the mercenaries, is by killing Momomi, so they continue to hide Momokichi's body from his daughter and fake a kidnapping to get a ransom out of her. She eventually captures Mikura, who is discreetly replaced with a robot double. The oblivious Momomi then lets a pair of criminals sexually assault her, and thankfully, it's the robot that ends up going through this. The criminals keep up the act repeatedly as revenge, and at some point, the Mikura robot begins to ask for more. But that's all for the NSFW content of Mesoforte, as the rest of the story is much more action-packed. However, the OVA release had two different versions, with one having the original story and the director's cut editing out the sexually graphic scenes. The United States version doesn't have the pornographic elements either, and at best only shows nudity. Wicked City, 1987. This film, set in 80s Tokyo, is one where the human world and the demon world exist together but in separate dimensions. Every 500 years, a peace treaty must be renewed to maintain peace. Secret agents known as the Blackguard work from both worlds to maintain this peace, but radicals threaten the institution, as these demons believe in the inferiority of humans and don't wish to cooperate with. The point of Wicked City on the surface revolves around the protagonist Taki, a human member of the Blackguard, working alongside Makie, a demon member of the Blackguard, to protect the important diplomat Giuseppe Mayert from the radicals, at least until the treaty is signed. Wicked City is the work of Hideyuki Kikuchi, who is known to have created Vampire Hunter D. The movie is full of sexual scenes and nudity. In fact, one of the earliest scenes depicts Taki hooking up with a woman from the bar, and there is frontal nudity for the woman and the depiction of intercourse, although not to the same level as Mesoforte. After Taki meets Makie, every 2 seconds we're subjected to a scene of Makie being assaulted, first by her radical demon ex-boyfriend, then by a tentacled parasite creature, and then a gang assault scene where she's at the den of the radicals being punished for being a traitor against demonkind. The scenes are explicit and show Makie nude and in extremely compromising positions. Her final sexual scene is one of lovemaking with Taki, as the whole point of the film was for them to fall in love and conceive a child together for the sake of unity between the two worlds. Makie aside, we also see other sexual scenes, such as the one with Giuseppe Maillard in the soap house, where he's being bathed by a naked woman, and even puts his mouth on her more sensitive body parts, which is very much in the hentai territory instead of subtle depictions of sexual activities we usually see in movies. At some point, another demon woman tries to seduce Taki and goes nude, while her entire body turns into a female sex organ meant to suck Taki in. But with Makie being assaulted by several radicals right in front of his eyes, Taki manages to resist her powers and ultimately saves Makie. While having nudity or even sexual scenes isn't so much the problem, the constant usage of sexual assault as fan service across animes of this era normally makes consumers very uncomfortable, and rightfully so. Wicked City falls into the same trap over and over again. Ninja Scroll, 1993. 1993's Ninja Scroll, written and directed by Yoshiaki Kawajiri, has its premise set in feudal Japan. Before that, however, the same director has worked on Vampire Hunter D, Wicked City, Cyber City Wado 808, Demon City Shinjuku, and The Animatrix, so these films do end up falling under the same sort of umbrella. Anyways, protagonist Kibagami Jubei is a mercenary swordsman and former ninja whose battles are against a supernatural ninja troupe known as the Eight Devils of Kimon, as the ninjas want to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate. In the story, he's joined by the elderly spy Daquan and the kunoichi Kagero, with Kagero's body being infused with poisons and toxins. As you can guess, the first scene depicting rape is of Kagero, who gets captured by a devil while her team is investigating mysterious deaths caused by ninjas. Her team was massacred, and she, the sole survivor, was captured. During the sequence, however, she was saved by Kibagami Jubei. At some point, Jubei gets poisoned while Kagero learns that she needs to sleep with him to save him, as he can only be saved by the toxins in her body. So, the two of them copulating will allow her toxins to counteract the toxins in his body. Kagero extends the offer to Jubei, but the latter turns it down. Later, when he finds her mortally wounded, feelings are confessed between the two parties and they share a kiss. This ends up curing Jubei, but Kagero ends up passing away. Overall, Ninja Scroll is not as explicit as some of the other entries on this list, and it mostly sticks to nudity and mature sexual content instead of straight-up intercourse. Its only jarring moment is the one scene in the beginning, but due to its particularly subtle sexuality, Ninja Scroll has been able to gain widespread acclaim overseas, as the content is exciting enough for people to feel fan-serviced, but not too much to feel offensive. Its rich plot and storytelling has also made it one of the most influential anime films of all time, at least among the adult-oriented anime films. Kite, 1998. This 1998 psychological thriller by Yasuome Umetsu is famous for depictions of brutal violence and for being extremely sexually explicit. In fact, the uncensored version has scenes involving a minor, and as a result, Kite is banned or heavily censored across many regions. Also, Kite and Mesoforte are by the same twisted creator. The story introduces a young schoolgirl named Sawa who was orphaned in her early teens after her parents were murdered. At one point, she goes on a date with a celebrity, where the celebrity gets confronted by an elderly woman for going out with such a young girl. Sawa then kills the man while the woman gets a heart attack from shock. Naturally, this becomes a case that gets the detectives involved, and it just so happens that Sawa's legal guardians, Akai and Kani, are the detectives on this case. The story steeps lower into its problematic territory due to pedophilic undertones when it's revealed that ever since Sawa has been under Akai and Kani's guardianship, her and Akai have engaged in a sexual relationship, which means it began when she was even younger than she is now. Akai had also gifted her a pair of crystal earrings which contained the blood of her late parents. Sawa is eventually trained to become an assassin and befriends a fellow assassin named Obori working for Akai and Kani, who is of her age. Eventually, Obori resigns from their employment, but Akai orders Sawa to kill him before he does it himself. This prompts Obori to let Sawa know that her legal guardians are the ones responsible for killing her biological parents, but Sawa claims to have been aware of that for quite some time. Akai continues to try to get Obori killed, but Sawa always comes to his rescue, until they manage to capture Sawa and punish Oburi in worse ways than killing him. As a result, Oburi is forced to watch Akai bloodily assaulting Sawa, and throughout everything, Oburi and Sawa are child assassins, so you can see why the film is controversial. Well, that's it for the end of the sexual parts. The film retains its violence to the end, and Sawa manages to kill both Kani and Akai, while Oburi presumably gets killed by another child assassin. Fun fact, Sawa was present in a scene in Mesoforte, as the latter is considered to be a spiritual sequel to the former, but this scene was more like a cameo. Sawa's character, although strong, is sad, as she's been subjected to a life of forced sexual exploitation while having to bear the burden of being a child assassin. Any sexual encounter between her and Akai is assault, as it's statutory rape due to their ages. More than that, the film explores these moments and themes quite graphically. Of course, this has also left Kite subject to intense criticism, not so much because the film is showing a young girl as a victim, but because there's a sexualization of her character throughout the depiction. Plus, there are clearly fetish elements inspired from Lolicon, which rightfully makes Kite a movie that must be criticized, especially with the themes of child abuse being portrayed without clear moral condemnation, causing the sanctity of the film to be heavily debated. Marvelous verdict! The media content from the VHS boom seen in animated films and OVA were more than simple fan service due to how far they would sometimes take things. A lot of films are straight-up hentais instead of being R-rated, but cultural factors do play a role in this, as Japan was open to accepting such sexual media. In fact, while Japan is a conservative society, they are extremely accepting of all forms of content when it comes to their animated media. So now you've got Japanese pop idols who can't date, but anime is full of big chests. And this is also because anime is a subculture that doesn't involve humans present on screen, allowing creators to be as experimental as they want to be with whichever genres they want to explore. And with that, today's video comes to an end. What did you think of the anime on this list? Did you enjoy this video? If so, then don't forget to like and comment down below. Until next time, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.